I worked on NME radio as well for about 3 years in the middle, from its inception. Well, maybe a year after it started, worked on NME radio, and then the station kind of, well, it collapsed really. It ran out of money and fell apart. But from there, I also worked on Six Music, and I worked on both. Being freelance, I worked on XFM and Six Music at the same time until they said, you can't do that anymore, because they didn't like it. And now I've been working on Six Music for about 4 or 5 years, and I've covered at some stage every single show in the schedule except for one at lunchtime. So ultimately, I don't have my own show on Six Music, but I am on there all the time, and I'm doing stuff next week, and I've got loads of other things. So I'm on there all the time, and alongside that, I promote music and play music and make podcasts and all sorts of other stuff as well. So does that cover everything?
It's just incredible to hear how much experience you have and how many different stations you've been at, both commercial stations and BBC stations, which is kind of what I want to kick off with. Maybe just explaining what the radio landscape is in the UK and how. We have a lot of regional radio, we have a lot of large national stations, but which ones are the key ones? Just how it works, really.
It depends what your motivation is, what you want to do on radio, what sort of music you want to get onto radio, and where you sort of exist in the grand scheme of things, because the BBC and commercial radio are so different. It's like I started out in commercial radio and then moved across, and it's like working in two different industries. If you're a presenter on commercial radio, you tend to be in the studio on your own. You don't make any decisions, barely any decisions about what music you play. That you're given a playlist, and you maybe get one or two. If you're on at night time with a specialist show, you do, but otherwise, you get very little choice. It's all decided by the station, and it's just you do everything. You produce everything, you look after the social media, and on the BBC, I've done shows where I've had 4 people in the studio working with me on doing various things. One looking after social media, and another person doing this, and all the different, everything at the BBC as well, because there's a really hot climate in terms of compliance, so they have to be very careful because they've got into a lot of trouble about certain things that have been broadcast, which I won't go into wisely. But so there's a lot of things, but everything has to be listened and checked all the time. And so the BBC, you get a big team of people around you. So what tends to happen is that everyone in commercial radio says, at the BBC, they've got it easy. They can do whatever they like. They've got all the resources. And at the BBC, everyone's like, there's so much control and we're not allowed to do what we want. So ultimately, everyone moans about what everybody else has. But in commercial radio, it's very, very different. But at the BBC, you feel like you can. The BBC has its remit to educate, inform, and entertain. The old Reithian remit, which means that it gets to play and I guess give new music a leg up in a way that other radio doesn't. Bob Shannon is the director of radio at the BBC, the big boss, and he said just last week that Radio 1 has a reputation to lead by playing new music first, and then the commercial industry and everybody else follows. And that's pretty true, to be honest. That feels like the way things are. So Radio 1 will lead on some music. They'll play it in daytime and in the evening, and then after that, things will start to happen. Commercial radio will wait and see what Radio 1 are playing, and then they'll follow on. And it feels very much like that, but obviously now with streaming and everything else, it's more muddy, but yeah.
And what, if you have this to mind, what is the official target demographic for the BBC Radio 1 crowd?
So Radio 1 is aimed at 14 to 24, 25, but they need older audience, and obviously it's quite hard. How do you tell an audience to stop listening to a radio station and move on to another? You can't do it. And also secretly, though they can't say it, but they love to have those older listeners because they gives them bigger numbers. Radio 2, I think its demographic is something sort of 30-ish to 50 and above. Six Music exists as a kind of specialist music station that is sort of somewhere in between the two, I suppose. And then you have One Extra as well, which is the urban sister station of Radio 1. What else do we have? Radio 4 is not music. what else is it? Radio 3 plays classical music as well, and experimental music, and into that.
One Extra?
Yeah, One Extra is the sister station for Radio 1. So they play urban music, and their age group is the same as Radio 1. We were having a conversation last night talking about this, and the stations can get very competitive. So it's quite tricky. If you're an artist and you want to pitch your music at a certain radio station, BBC station, you have to be careful, because if you go straight to Radio 2, other stations aren't going to want to play your music, because they'll be like, oh, your music's for old people, it's middle of the road, it's boring, it's dull. So really, Radio 1 is your first port of call. That's if your music suits Radio 1. So that's the first place to go.
And to open up the day today, I just showed you the top 10 most popular radio stations from 2016. So I'm just going to read through them, because I've got them in front, just so that we've got them in mind. So the first one was BBC Radio 2 with 15.1 million listeners every week. BBC Radio 4 had 11.2, so that's news.
Speech, speech programming, drama, all sorts.
Yeah. BBC Radio 1 is third. Then we have a commercial station after that. We have Heart, followed by Capital FM, BBC Radio 5 Live. That's me listening to football on a weekend. Smooth, Classic FM, Kiss, and Magic. So the top 10 stations are a real mix of the BBC's stations and commercial ones too. So just so that you have that in your mind. But I also said earlier that, and I'm opening up for you to argue with me on this, but I said that BBC Radio 1 and BBC 6 Music are arguably the two stations that can be seen as the taste-making stations. So you just said about Radio 1 and...
Yeah, I'd agree with that, and One Extra as well, given the music that they would play of a more, I hate to use the word urban, but I guess black music on One Extra. They break a lot of music, and they have that crossover with Radio 1. But Radio 1 really does lead in terms of new young artists and new pop music. At the moment, it tends to lead more on beat-based music, and like I say, black music and guitar music tends to have, or more experimental and esoteric music has taken a bit of a back seat. But it tends to lead there, and Six Music as well plays a lot of specialist new music, a lot of guitar music and everything, all different styles actually. I mean, I've done shows where I'll play everything on a show. If I do a specialist show on Six Music, but I've had people complain about playing too much urban music, or people think that Six Music is just a guitar station, but it's not. It plays everything. So depending on what you're trying to get onto the radio, it's Six will play, in theory at least, play anything on all day as well. Although they all have playlists, and commercial radio playlists tend to be extremely tight and very hard to break into, and BBC playlists have more opportunity for spot plays and one-off things chosen by the presenter or the producer. So
if, for example, I keep saying this today, if we were a Swedish artist wanting to come to the UK, we'd be targeting the stations that have the availability of these spot plays, right? So these would be the places to be going.
Yeah. The BBC really is the way to go, because they do tend to lead the way. It's worth focusing your efforts there to get the music on. I would say one thing that is really worth doing, I've heard this a lot today, people say put in the time to research, but it really is worth researching online, finding out producers of radio shows. I mean, with Twitter now, so many radio producers are on Twitter, and if you can because there are lots of shows on the BBC where the presenter is supposedly picking the music, but they're not. And they're even on Six Music as well. I'm not going to name anyone, but there are presenters on there who supposedly pick their music, but their producer really picks a lot of it for them. So that is like a little backdoor entry. So if you can approach the producers and get the music to them in a personal way with a personal email, not a generic blanket email, you really need to do it. It can really pay dividends, I think, going in that sort of way. But going directly to a presenter on Twitter, it's probably not going to have much of an effect, because people get sent, as I get sent, a million things every day, and you just don't see it all. You can't respond to it. I mean, just because you like something, you can't get through it all.
Yeah. So what would, apart from reaching out for the producer, I mean, we were talking about radio pluggers earlier. What, for a new artist for example, would you suggest that getting a plugger would be a good idea, or in certain scenarios perhaps it's a good idea, or?
Obviously, the people who we've been hearing from today who work in PR and pluggers, I love them all dearly, and I think they're very nice people. But I don't think that necessarily throwing a load of money at someone who works in PR is always the best way to do things. No one, I'm really shocked actually and surprised today that no one at all has mentioned Bandcamp. Can I ask how many people in here use or are familiar with Bandcamp? That's quite a few. But no one's mentioned it really at all today, and I think someone, one of the earlier sessions, somebody said, what happened to MySpace? And I think that, obviously, I think that Bandcamp is, yeah, but Bandcamp, yeah, well, SoundCloud as well, but I think Bandcamp is very, very similar to what MySpace was, because it's got a really brilliant community aspect to it. I discover a ton of music on there. From recommendations and things that you've bought, that then you get your emails and everything. I mean, in Gmail, when you've got your different columns of emails, my email on all the updates is just all Bandcamp, just constantly things saying, buy this is out there. And that, for me, is such a rich resource of music from people releasing stuff. So first thing, you've got to get a Bandcamp page. I think that's a really important, valuable thing to do. Why was I talking about Bandcamp?
Because I had asked if it's necessary to get a plugger.
Oh yeah, so in that case, so I would say have a Facebook page, and work with those for a while. So, I mean, the people that were talking earlier about the order that you do things, I think, with the streaming playlists and everything like that, I'm always quite cynical about the notion of having a plan or a journey or the story or the plot or however you call it. And that's the very kind of BBC Radio 1 thing to have, is to sort of say, I've heard about meetings where someone will go in, a plugger or an artist themselves, and say, we've got this many streams on SoundCloud, this many streams on Spotify, can we get on the playlist? And I'd say, yeah, but what's the plot? Because they think, well, further down the line, we want to have you headlining out. If you make it massive, we want you to say, oh yeah, well, I was first played on Radio 1, and then I played it, and then so when you play, they want you to headline a festival further on down the track. Now, I'm probably quite naive, cynical, and old-fashioned in that I hear a song I like, and then I want to play it on the radio. And that's it. I don't care about a plot. I don't care if they never release, if another single's ever released again. I don't care if there's a story or whatever. That's all I want to do as someone who plays music on the radio. And,
But without that story, how are we getting that music in front of you in the first place? Is it just you flicking through on Bandcamp, or?
Yeah, which is a bit flaky, I suppose. But what I'm saying is the idea of building this whole body of work and saying, well, and someone comes to you and say, well, in 2 years' time, we're going to release this album, and this is and then we're going to drip feed this. All that stuff's fine, but that doesn't sway me either way in terms of whether I'm not thinking about it from a careerist point of view. Does that make sense? I'm not thinking about what I'm going to play and thinking, well, yeah, this could really serve me if I play this band well, because they'll come back and say, it's like the PR people who take on certain jobs for the cash. None of those people today, I think, do that. I will say that. But I get plugged music by countless people who you can tell they just take the money to send you music, and there's no artistic sort of integrity with what, I mean, it's PR, but they're not doing it for the love of it. They're doing it because they want to make money. There's a business end. For me, there's no business aspect to it at all, really, or careerist. I just want to play records on the radio. That's it. But that said, Radio 1, Six Music, they want to have a good relationship. The Six Music, there are certain bands that are regarded as Six Music bands, certain artists, people like The National. I mean, there are lots. Maybe St. Vincent, people like that. They're the ones that Six Music will be playing all day, every day, and will try and get special deals in place so that they can have them headline events at Maid of Vale for sessions or whatever else. But that's kind of that backslappy business that I'm not really a part of in radio. I'm just sort of playing odd music at night time. But there are a lot of deals go on, especially on commercial radio as well. And it's all about what the band can do for you as a radio station, not just how your music sounds on the radio.
Yeah. Can I just ask you quickly about some of the playlisting stuff? So at Six, do you have the A-list rotation and the B-list rotation, and how does that process work?
Well, Radio 2 and Six Music, there's a man called Jeff Smith, and he's the head of all of the he's basically the head of music at those stations. So he's the guy who decides ultimately what stays on a playlist, what leaves a playlist, and what the station's policy is in terms of how it sounds and the tone of the playlist and how adventurous it might be with new music or how safe it might be. And at the moment, I would say Radio 2 is in a pretty safe place. It doesn't take many risks. At Six Music, you have somebody who works there under Jeff Smith. So they work together, but they don't. But Six Music is different because it's a bit more esoteric and a bit more adventurous with its music. But it's not like a pirate station. It's not like an internet station. It still has quite a rigid, especially in the daytime, a rigid playlist where presenters will get, I don't know, I would say someone like Laura Naverne, who does the mid-morning show on Six Music, she'll get maybe 5 or 6 songs in a show that she picks. The rest is all playlist. Radcliffe and McConey maybe slightly less. Steve Lamacq is another one as well. He does Drive. He's probably something similar. So he doesn't pick all of his music by any stretch. And then in the evenings, that's when the whole thing is just completely chosen by the producer or the presenter or a kind of mix of both. And then the weekend shows that are more specialist as well, they're kind of similar. So it's like half and half, I would say, of what gets picked. So what the music team in theory do is look at what's been played as spot plays by presenters and picked as on there, and then they will maybe, if they like it, they'll feed that in, and then it will maybe make it onto a playlist and maybe make it through that way. I've had people email me, a lot of pluggers do this, they'll email you and say, they'll say thank you for playing that record. They might not have even sent it to you, but you've picked it yourself. But they'll say thank you for playing that. Could you have a word with Lauren, head of music, to see if she wants to put it on? We've got a playlist meeting tomorrow, and if you could just have a word with her and just send her a little nudge email and say, hey, I really like this song. I can't bring myself to do that. I mean, it's not my choice what goes on the Six Music playlist. But you get a lot of that. You get a lot of this kind of political, suggestive kind of, this could be on there, that could be on the playlist, and things are on a playlist not just because of the merit of a song. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know how much of this I should say, but somewhere like I knew this was happening.
It's just, we're all friends in here, aren't we? We're all friends.
We're all friends.
It's not going any further.
Nothing's on Twitter at all. But you know, there's a lot of things happen that are kind of embarrassing sometimes at stations where they'll say, we have the Mercury Prize in the UK every year, and there are 12, is it 12? 12 artists, 15, 12? There's like a short list of 12 artists who all make it through with their certain respective albums on this list. And a station like Six or Radio 2 or even Radio 1, they won't play anything from these albums, or one or two of them, for the whole, since they come out. And as soon as they get announced that they're on this list, they're all over them and they're playing them. And that's like, to me, that's the tail wagging the dog a bit. Do you know what I mean? It's like pretending, hey, we were playing Skepta all along. Of course we're playing Skepta. We love Skepta. But they hadn't played him for years. So you get a lot of that in radio where it's things are sort of a bit backwards, really. Is that? Yeah, I don't know if I should say that. But yeah, anyway.
Well, I mean, this weirdly leads into the next point that I wanted to get to, which is streaming.
Yeah.
Streaming. So Spotify now has more weekly listeners than Radio 1, according to the internet. I read that the other day. And it was just mentioned in the last panel as well that perhaps people that had previously used the radio for that kind of lean back, listen experience have now transferred their loyalty to a streaming service. But I just wanted to know what your take is on it, and if you think that there is a world in which radio and streaming services can exist happily together, harmoniously alongside each other.
One of the reasons people want to use streaming services or radio to listen to music is because they don't want to have to make the choice themselves, because we're crippled by choice in so many ways, and people don't want to have to choose. I love music, but sometimes the idea of having all of the music ever recorded, in theory, right there to play with, it's too much and you can't do it. And so obviously people are drawn to playlists or radio to have those decisions made for them. What radio, I think, can do that streaming services at least haven't done enough of yet is contextualize that music and give you a reason to listen to it, or I think that what radio can, good music radio, say Iggy Pop, for example. Iggy Pop does a show on Six Music every Friday night. And when he plays something on that show, not only is he giving it as an endorsement as Iggy Pop, which is obviously a good stamp anyway for you to get as a band, but he will lead into that with his low voice. And he'll go,
that's a really good impression.
but he goes in and he'll announce the song. And as he leads into it, he'll say, I remember when I was with Iggy. He'll say, I remember when I was with Bowie and we were in the back of a cab and we were on Sunset Strip. And in your mind as a listener, you've got this incredible context of why Iggy wants to play this particular piece of music on the radio. And what he does so brilliantly, he sets this scene in it with real brevity. Actually, he does it really effectively. You're in the car with Iggy and Bowie, and then the song starts, and your brain is still processing or imagining this little scene that he's set, and the music. That sounds silly, and obviously a radio presenter is going to say this, but the music, which is already good, sounds even better. It elevates the music because it's given you like a picture in your mind, and that, I think, is what radio can do that streaming services can't do. But that is lean forward radio. That's the radio that you actually pay attention to, and it's not just existing in the background. Majority of commercial radio in the UK, in the daytime, is commercial radio that it only exists to be in the background. I've always been excited by the idea of playing something on the radio that will make someone annoyed. Like I like the idea of playing something that is confrontational and abrasive and doesn't fit with the song that was played before. I want to play something that jars with you and makes you feel strange.
That's very interesting, because if you speak to any playlist editor and a streaming service, it is the complete opposite answer that you're going to get.
So that's another thing I think that radio can do, and do really effectively, that streaming services can't do. Because if you don't have that bridge, that gap, that person in the middle that says that was some incredible modern jazz, and now we're going to play techno. If that was on a playlist, that would sound awful. Those things would not, well, they might work together, I don't know. But on the whole, the presenter is there to make that gap and to contextualize those things. And that's why I think radio is still important, and why it has such an important place with modern streaming culture. And I think that Spotify will do that. They have tried doing various things where they have playlists with little bits of speech recorded in the middle and stuff, but it's not, I don't know if it's popular here, but it doesn't really seem to be very popular in the UK anyway.
Yeah. And I think another angle to that as well is I've talked a lot to people about algorithms and, algorithms creating playlists and things. And some of the stuff that Spotify do, for example, it blows my mind that they know that I listened to that band when I was 14. Like Spotify wasn't even invented then.
But
How do they know?
Well, I feel sorry to interrupt you, but I kind of get annoyed. I listen to many different formats, depending on what happened to be doing at the time. And one of the things that annoyed me about Discover Weekly or anything on Spotify is that I can't help but feel, and this may be naive and I might be a cynical old man, but I just feel like it's reductive. And I feel like the music that is played on a Spotify Weekly playlist, even though it's only based on what you've listened to already, and in fact I've got two problems with it. The first one is that it's reductive, and that it kind of, I feel like ultimately in the long run, over many, many hundreds of years, you'd end up with one song. Yeah. That's the long game. Yeah. So you're reducing everything down. I mean, I'm not even going to get into talking about the mood playlist where the music just exists for the sake of the playlist and no other reason whatsoever. But that's a different conversation,
Yeah.
But I know it's not like that, and I want to be surprised and shocked by what comes on next. I don't want it to be something else that I kind of already like. And do you know what else I hate? I hope
you're going to tell us.
I am. I really hate that I'll listen to and it does it on Apple Music as well. I'll listen to an album. No, Spotify does it. Apple doesn't actually. I'll listen to something on Spotify and it'll get to the end of the record and then it will go, wow, John really liked listening to this record by, love listening to this, Miles Davis. What are we going to put on next? And it will then try and predict something that I'll like. And there's a bit of me that hates the audacity of that. Now, I know I'm being a snob up there, and I know that, I should be more open-minded, but I don't like it going, well, I know what you'll like next. And I want to argue. I'm going to say, this doesn't go with that. What are you doing? Sometimes it gets it right and sometimes it doesn't. But I want to listen to one album or playlist and that's it. The other thing as well that I find that is wrong with those algorithmic playlists is that, because I've got 2 young daughters who listen to a lot of Disney music. And they also listen to, what else do we have? The Trolls soundtrack. ABBA, actually, funnily enough, because of Mamma Mia. They've recently really got into Mamma Mia, the musical, and the film. So we have a lot of ABBA on at the moment. I'm not just saying it, but, we've had that. So my playlists, my, Spotify algorithmically made playlists are all over the place. Which I suppose is what I want, but... just with less Justin Timberlake, but so that as well. I want to know that someone somewhere is putting those songs together for a reason, and because they think that they sound good together.
Absolutely, and this is what I wanted to get to with this point, is that as intelligent as these systems might become, I feel like they will always be missing this wild card factor.
Yeah, that's what I want.
I mean, you just mentioned Justin Timberlake. I listen to a lot of punk music on Spotify, but I love Justin Timberlake. But Spotify doesn't know that, and it's never going to just throw it in the middle of whatever it is that I'm listening to on a random day. So
but it might make a link. It might make a link from Justin Timberlake quite feasibly, and think, well, if you like Rock Your Body, then you're going to be a big fan of maybe Michael Jackson as well, and go back. But you don't want to listen to the Michael Jackson. Do you know what I mean? But it would put that in a playlist for you, quite understandably.
Yeah. But I think this is where this human touch that you were mentioning, like when you did that fantastic Iggy impression a minute ago, that's where that is so super important, is just adding that human context to whatever is going on. I think we're doing fine for time, but so I wanted to ask you about something that you mentioned to me earlier, something called Compare My Radio. Oh yeah.
So there's a website. We were talking earlier about commercial radio and the BBC. There is. Should we explain about how the BBC's funded and why has got a different ethos? I don't know if I've been clear on that. But the BBC is obviously people pay their television license. And they pay a BBC license, and a lot of people resent having to pay the license, and there's certain right-wing press who hate the fact that we have to pay for the license, and so newspapers in the UK like the Daily Mail or whatever, or the Times, or because Rupert Murdoch has got other interests, obviously, so with Sky and whatever else, so he resents the BBC, and so the BBC can't win a lot of the time. It will get attacked if it's too popular, and it will be attacked if it doesn't have enough listeners, because people say, well, we're paying for this. This should be really popular. This should be what the people want. So they want lots of listeners, but as soon as they get lots of listeners or lots of viewers, then the commercial sector say, well, hang on, you're doing our job. You're nicking listeners from us. So basically, they just can't win ultimately. But why are we talking about the BBC in that way?
Because we were going to talk about Compare My Radio.
Oh yeah, so there's this website called Compare My Radio, comparemyradio.com, and you can put an artist into Compare My Radio, and what it will do is tell you how many times they've been played and on which stations in the UK. But what's interesting is that it blends commercial radio and the BBC, and you can approach it in all different ways, and you can look at how many different artists have been played on the station. And if you look at Radio 1 and Radio 2 and the BBC stations, it will say in the month of May, thousands of different artists were played, and the difference is so dramatic because the playlists on commercial radio are so much less adventurous and so much narrower that it will be in the hundreds, and it's the difference between the two is so enormous. So that's a really useful way of finding out what sort of music, if you're pitching your music for a certain place, where would be a good place for you to go to send your music. I guess comparemyradio.com is good if you're looking at how to approach UK radio.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, does anybody have any questions from the audience for the time being?
Hello.
Hi.
I used to grow up listening to BBC One Extra and all that back in the days. What was I thinking? There's a lot of other platforms as well, like web-based radio stations nowadays, like NTS, Radio Radar, and Rinse FM. What do you think about that? Like for breaking new artists, I think that could be also like an option to look into.
I absolutely agree. So, yeah, NTS is a brilliant radio station. I mean, it's very much a global station, obviously, because it's online, but it has all manner of different music, all manner of different styles, and it presents music. I mean, you know, they do have a lot of speech on there, and they do have presenters trying to explain music at certain times. It's in the spirit of old pirate stations, really, and they are the most interesting stations that are around. So, you know, WFMU in the States as well is something similar. But yeah, you're right. Kiss FM in London started as a pirate. That's how it started out, and it was very adventurous, and then it just became homogenized and commercial, and nowadays it just plays pop music, but dance versions of pop songs, you know. But yeah, NTS is a good one, and Rinse as well. Even Rinse now is going on that path where it's a lot more. I mean, it is adventurous, but not as adventurous. I guess Thunder may have been stolen slightly by something like One Extra, which does a similar thing. But yeah, those stations are good. And there's also tiny stations like Soho Radio in London. It sounds small, but it's a tiny little station based right in the middle of Soho, but it's a good image because it has really influential people DJing on there. People like Pete Paphides, who's a really good music writer who writes for all manner of different people, but he does a show on there. So getting your music to someone like Pete Paphides would be a really good sort of, and again, it's like a sort of sneaky way of getting your music played by people who are really influential. One thing, this is not dropping a name in a way, Pete Paphides, but only last year I became friends with him on Facebook, and it's incredible that there's this community on Facebook of people who they write about music in Facebook posts, but only the people that they're friends with see it. So you mentioned Alexis Petridis, who's a Guardian journalist earlier. He's friends with Pete, and there's Caitlin Moran, who Pete Paphides is married to. There's this little community of people that you're privy to when you're on Facebook, but they all influence each other when they talk about music. And it is, and weirdly, there are bands that I've seen Pete mention on Facebook, and the following week they've come up in my Spotify feed somehow. And it's really, I know that coincidence might have something to do with it, but it is creepy. But you know, the way I'm so blind with how these things work online, that there must be, do you know what I mean? You can't help but be a little bit freaked out by it. But yeah, but they are really influential people, and they do little things like I say, small shows. Like Pete Paphides is a good option. There's loads of people like that are on smaller stations. So Soho Radio and NTS as well, the people that are on there, and yeah, they're well worth seeking out.
So clearly AI is the future when it comes to music consumption, but I've heard you express some...
Is it though?
I would say it is, but what is an alternative? Because obviously it's not scalable to have someone hand curate every single person's playlist. So what in an ideal world, what would you like to see as a way in which new people can consume music in a way that's curated, but not, I guess, generic?
I think that ultimately we're in a place now, moving forward, where we have two sets of music fans, or people that listen to music. You have people that listen to music from a kind of functional day-to-day background, lean back experience, and you have people that are music obsessive, who are fans, who want to know everything about an artist, the kind of people who will look them up, who will read about them, the kind of people, I guess, that would have read sleeve notes on a record, those people as well. And I think that the key now is knowing your audience and serving that audience really well. Having access to those fans is the most important thing. And while the other stuff, I don't really understand that whole streaming world and that whole music in the background thing. And, those people don't want to know why the drum sound is the way it is. Yeah, and that's fine, but the people over here do. So I feel like we're left with a kind of, we were saying earlier, like a permanent underground where this music really exists in this space over here. It serves its audience really well. It does it effectively. The fans are huge fans of the artist, and the artist respects the fans, and they've got like an exchange going on, and it doesn't really trouble this other kind of bland, faceless algorithmically led. I feel like I don't hate algorithms, so I'll just make that clear. And it is incredibly clever.
That's not what it sounds like.
It's amazing science. I just want people to put music in front of me that they think is really special. I've got this podcast that I'm working on at the moment where I go to someone's house who has a good record collection, but music that I don't necessarily know. And I want to go there and take them some records, and I want them to play me some records. Like when you're 14 and you first get into music and you want to go around your friend's house and sit in their bedroom and listen to songs. And I've done a podcast where I've done 6 so far. And that to me is a really exciting thing, to get you out of your comfort zone. But what that person does is they guide you through the music in a way that is really intensely personal and gives you a different way of looking at it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it raises the interesting point as well, which kind of counters that AI idea of perhaps the more, the more stuff that we have put in front of us, the more of a personal touch people are going to need, or they're going to desire when it comes to their music. So I don't think that the two have to outdo one another. I think that we can, algorithms and human curation, radio presenters, I think can happily live side by side. It's just making sure that we're doing the best that we can with the situation. So if we can combine the two in some way to make the ultimate listening experience, which is ultimately what we're all going for.
I use, like I said, if I'm at home and I want to put a record on, I will do that, and I'll buy records when I want to, because we can't afford now, unless we're browsing through old records and bargain bins or charity shops, which I do a lot, and that kind of thing. That's one way of doing it. But buying new records, you don't really tend to take a punt on a record because they're so, particularly in Sweden, by the way, it's so expensive to go record shopping. So, you can't really go, I really like the sleeve of this one, I'll buy this, unless it's really old stuff. So I'll listen to a record, or I will put on a Spotify playlist. I went to the Soul of a Nation exhibition at the Tate Modern a couple of weeks ago, which is a really great exhibition looking at black art through the 60s, 70s, and 80s. It's an amazing thing, but Soul Jazz Records made a compilation to go with it, which you can buy, which is fine, I saw earlier, and it was 650 krona. Yeah, it's expensive. So there's that, but then they also made a Spotify playlist, and you go in and you do the scan thing. Obviously, like you said before, you guys probably yeah, of course, that's what happens. Fine, that's what. But for me, it was like a thing to go in to sort of scan the Spotify thing, and I walked around the exhibition listening to this playlist while I was there, and I keep going back to it. So that's when I love. Yeah, but I know that's been put together by the people at Soul Jazz or the people who have done that exhibition. So that I know the reason, the context is there for me. Does that make? Yeah, that makes sense.
So it's the context that is the most important
Yeah.
thing. So how do you think that relates to what I very briefly mentioned this earlier, but like with Radio 1 really branching out into the online world and making a lot more video content than they have previously and stuff, that is adding more context to. More visual context to things. So do you think that that's something we're going to see across the radio board, or is that?
Yeah, well, there are many things that Six Music could do better that it doesn't do. There's so much great BBC content, all these archive sessions and live performances and things that they've got sitting, all the John Peel shows that are all there in the archive, all the Peel sessions that have to be played out. They're all kind of lost at the moment in the night time, and I think there are far better ways that they could use all of that content and put it out. In a more effective way. A lot of radio will become time shifted to compete with obviously streaming services, and I think that they should use presenters to contextualize all that stuff as well, again in a way that streaming services don't. Sorry, what's your question?
My question was about Radio 1 going into visual content.
Yeah, so what I'm going to say is that the presenter on Radio 1 called Charlie Sloth, and he was on one extra. He's just been given a new show, which is on in the evening. I think it's 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock till 10. No, yeah, 9 till 11. And apparently the show's going to be a fully 360. It's like a TV show on the radio, effectively. where you're going to be able to watch it at the same time that it goes out. So it'll be probably on a red button in the UK, or it'll be on YouTube at the same time as being on the radio. And there will be a lot more of that. And Six Music had their live Maid of Vale sessions the other week, and they did the same thing. That's where Morrissey was extremely offensive. But you know that. So they're doing. They are doing that. They are making strides to do that. But obviously they want to try and do that more. But yeah, Radio 1 are good at that, and they've got to do it, really.
I think we've got time for one more question, if anybody's got one. Yeah, do we have a mic around? Just down the front here.
I have a tip for you. If you have Spotify, don't go to Discover Weekly, don't go to Release Radar, don't go to their playlists, and when you have your favorite album, just put it on repeat, and then you get just the album. That's the tip.
Well, I do that.
So fuck their stuff. And we're a couple of guys who are going to an after work at the Spotify office, which is really close, the Swedish one. So we will tip them, and I want this too. The total random button. If I press that, I get non-algorithm, just randomly picked of every song they have.
Do you know what?
Bam.
That is.
I want that.
I had a meeting. There's a guy who used to run the playlist at Radio 1, George Ergatudis. And who did I meet? I met someone from Spotify. This is 2 or 3 years ago. And I think that what Spotify could have and should have is exactly that. So just everything shuffled. But I also think that you should be able to turn up how esoteric your music tastes are. So you can say, exactly. I want everything to be random, or I can turn it down a bit if you're in a more of a kind of safe mood. But I've pitched that, and I think that is what they should do. But that doesn't serve them. That doesn't serve the algorithm thing, does it?
Because they want the algorithms, and they want people to be able, at Spotify, be able to go in and use the algorithms.
Yeah. Do you remember when I remember years ago when I first went on Spotify, they used to have things. I'm sure, I don't know if I'm making it, but they used to have things sorted into decades, and I feel like there was a section that was sort of pre-50s and 40s, so they had blues, and then there's the classical bit, and then they had 60s, you know, and all that. And I used to use a shuffle function then on all of those things together, because I just didn't want to know. I didn't want to know what was coming next. Exactly what you're saying. I love, you know, that to me is exciting. That's how it should be.
All right. Have we got any developers in the room that can put that together for them? No?
And also shuffle function. Instead of New Music Friday, you will have Shuffle Friday on everything released. Shuffle Friday. I want that.
I would love that.
From the demo bands that sounds like shit to like major company, blah blah blah. Just random. Everything.
I agree. But people don't like random, do they?
I like random.
All right. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for your time today, John.
Thanks.
Yeah.